Hey guys, what is up? Public here back in the video, and this is the first video going over the changes to Shadow Priest coming in Midnight. So we just got access to the alpha kind of first build of Midnight, and by no means is everything like finalized yet. This is basically the first pass of stuff that we're getting, but a lot of this is still very much work in progress. We're still missing some talents and things like that, but in this video I'm going to go over at least what's changed so far compared to live and talk about how I feel about them. Let's dive in. All right, so there was quite a lot that changed, and if you haven't already seen, I've kind of published a little bit of like a blog post, kind of trying to combine as much of this into one spot as I can because, you know, there's all the data mining and patch notes and, you know, some nuance that might get missed. So I have this here. I'll link this in the description below. I would give this a read if you want kind of a good reference here, and we'll kind of go over where it makes sense in game as well in this video. So kind of going from top to bottom here. So we did get a couple things that we've been asking for a long time added baseline. So Silence, Dispersion, and Vampiric Embrace have all become baseline spells for Shadow Priest in Midnight. Silence was also given the 30-second cooldown version, so Last Word was baked into it. So what this means is the top of our spec tree, and you know, all of our trees in general are quite different. We no longer have that kind of crowded utility in the top section of our tree. Now it's just more damage options. So honestly, great stuff so far. This is awesome. We've been asking for this for a long time. And now we get into the big prune. So their goal with this expansion is clearly to simplify the amount of spells that people have, lower the amount of procs and things like that. I don't think necessarily that means they're going to try to get rid of like skill expression by any means, but they're trying to make the game simpler. And they've pruned quite a bit to make that happen. So, you know, I'm not going to go over all of these, but just kind of hitting some of the highlights, right? They're kind of pruning some of our passive, you know, healing they were getting from like Essence Devourer, things like that. The healing was removed from Devouring Plague. They've also removed Psychic Horror out of the spec tree entirely. There's also, you know, kind of cleaning up a little bit of what we get access to in the class tree. So Renew, Prayer Mending is gone. Rhapsody is gone. A couple things like that. Void Shield as well. And they replaced quite a lot of this. Divine Star is also gone as well, which not super surprising there. Halo was also removed from the class tree and moved to Archon only. So this is something that you only get access to as Archon now. So not something in the class tree anymore, which is interesting. So yeah, quite a lot of changes here. And then if you talk about Shadow specific stuff, Dark Ascension is now gone. They've taken that feedback and that sucker's out of the game. Void Bolt has also been removed. So Void Form got a little bit of a rework. Let's go over in just a second. Void Torrent, at least as of now, is also gone from the game. And then, like we saw Last Word as well. So that's already a lot. Let's cover Void Form. This is a common thing that people ask questions about. So right off the bat, they've renamed this from Void Eruption and just called it Void Form for simplicity's sake. A lot of things have changed with this cooldown, but effectively what they've done is try to give you options depending on the playstyle that you want. Kind of what we were suggesting already from like getting rid of Dark Ascension, right? So it's still a 2-minute cooldown by default. It still replaces Shadow Form, so it's not giving you any extra damage increase on top of that. I am Archon, so it says it's giving me 30% increase, and that's because of Perfected Form. By default, it's only 10% damage increase, which is what Shadow Form is. And then, instead of giving you access to Void Bolt, you now get access to Void Volley. So this is a quite of a different change here, because Void Bolt was a lower cooldown spell. Void Volley, which is coming in from the previous expansion's iteration, is a 15-second cooldown that is hasted, that you get access to just like you did with Void Bolt back in the previous build. So you can usually get like 3, maybe 4 casts of this off in a Void Form that you're extending. Otherwise, you only get like 2 in a normal one. Void Volley still generates Insanity when you actually cast it, and it also still procs the Idol of Cthulhu Tendril as well. It is not refreshing dots. So even though Void Bolt was, that functionality is now gone. So we don't have that with baseline Void Form. We still get the bonus, or that kind of activation of Mastery. That's still in here. They've also removed the Mind Blast resetting. So that functionality is gone as well. So it's quite simplified. Now, they do have currently one choice node that builds off of that. So you can pick either Improved Void Form or Ancient Madness right now. And Improved Void Form is kind of like more Dark Ascension-y themed, where it generates 60 Insanity when you cast it and increases your spell damage by 5%. So it becomes 15% baseline instead of 10%. This is still, it's a casted cooldown still, so a lot of people were talking about that. That's still the same, but this kind of gives you a simpler version here. And then the other option is Ancient Madness, which gives you that extension mechanic. So to get that, you now have to add this additional point into it. So quite a lot of stuff for Void Form, and I'll show you what Void Vial works, or how it looks right now. All right, so with Void Eruption, or now called Void Form, when you cast it, still a cast time. It is giving the insanity right now that I have this, and then you see it changes to Void Volley right away, and then we can cast this. It goes on a 15-second hasted cooldown. Void Form is still ticking, so if I start spending insanity to actually extend this guy out just a little bit, you'll get another cast. And again, like I said, casting this gives you a little bit of insanity, procs a tendril, get that cool little animation. Now, when you cast Void Form, you also get a Void Volley for free. So instead of that like Void Eruption damage separate in your breakdown, now you just get a free Void Volley that shoots out when the cast finishes. So that is all the kind of changes to Void Form as it stands right now. All right, now the other thing, like I mentioned, Void Torrent has been removed in this build. So unfortunately, I can't talk too much about Void Weaver because they haven't changed it. Void Weaver just doesn't work right now because it still is coded for Void Torrent. So clearly this is still a work in progress. The patch notes clearly said Void Torrent is gone. You can see that we have some coming soon sections in our spec tree still. So really can't comment on how Void Weaver will feel, or that's basically half of our spec. So not a whole lot to comment on that. So we'll see if that gets replaced with something. I mean, I honestly love Void Torrent, and it feels weird to we're losing Void Bolt, Void Torrent, some of these old like Legion spells that we've had for a really long time. So I'm a little hesitant. We'll see what they end up doing, but I know like there were cases with like Archon or others where we were taking it but doing weird canceling stuff. So maybe they just said, hey, we don't get rid of extra buttons and kind of simplify the spec. So that's probably why they did that. Okay, so lots of changes in the talent tree, as you could already tell. So I'll move this side by side so you can get a look at this a little bit more easily. So they've made Shadow Fiend is now inside of our spec tree instead of the class tree. So I think Disc also gets access to this in their spec tree, but it's out for Holy. Kind of weird because it like Shadow Fiend's here and then Bender's like shortly after it. It's in our spec tree though, so it's competing with more stuff. So and it's still very weak. They didn't rework any of this, which I think just is really bad. Like these things need love and attention really badly, especially Inescapable Torment, and this whole kind of left side of the tree could still use some work. They also, to kind of go with the class tree a little bit, they did make Mind Blast and class talents at the top that we get, and they move Shadow or Death down here. So we get Mind Blast for free in the class tree, but if you want to pick up Death, it's now like optional or whatever in the spec tree. And then Psychic Scream is here as well, which you can also drop if you'd like, but we'll pretty much be taking that all the time. Same with Death. We can pretty much get access to everything that we like here, which is good. Lots of things to talk about here. Lots of things have been kind of changed here. I'm not going to cover all of these because they're quite minor, but with the kind of prune of this expansion, they've lowered a lot of everyone's defensives and things like that. But Shadow so far is somewhat skirted around that, which is kind of nice. They did remove the healing out of Devouring Plague, which is now called Shadow Word Madness because of that. We still have Mental Fortitude, although it's only getting healing from Vampiric Touch right now. But we also still have our Fade talents in here, where Fade gives us that 10% DR and the reduced cooldown. And we also still have Protective Light, which is the flash heal DR, and Dispersion is now baseline. So defensive-wise, we kind of came out pretty good on that. We still have our great Phantom Breach talent that everyone loves for the extra range. They've also peppered in a couple things with like, Mind Flay damage is in here. There's like a Haste talent, Shadowed Pain, Intellect talents. Some just like really like, whatever filler node talents have been thrown in here. They've also given us Spectral Illusion. This is an old Torghast power, if you guys remember that. Which what it does is when you press Fade, it gives a little clone of you where enemies will attack that instead, which is kind of nice. Very useful for like solo leveling and that kind of thing. But yeah, class tree is interesting. We're getting kind of most of what we want. They had some stamina in here. But really nothing too crazy was added here, at least for Shadow. And honestly, with the kind of leveling process, we're going from 80 to 90. We have all the things I'm getting here, and I'm only level like 82 or something. And throughout leveling, you get 3 extra points for this tree, which is really nice just to pick up even more stuff that you might like. And you can easily, for example, get all of the capstone talents, get Desperate Prayer, get everything that we need, no problem, which is nice. And there's a lot less, like, I'd say, like, dead talents in the class tree that are, like, clearly only going to ever be picked for, like, Holy or Disc, which that's also nice. There's, like, more of the tree that becomes useful as Shadow, which is really great. So I'm going to gloss over the hero trees just a little bit, just because Void Weaver's not done yet. Archon's also not done. They're all getting 3 new nodes that we're all going to get guaranteed. Not a whole lot to talk about here. I will note that, like I said, Halo was moved from the class tree just to be given as Archon. To compensate for that being added, they removed the power infusion node. So Archon no longer gets a boosted power infusion. And then the other thing that they've changed is there's a new TBD choice node that they haven't added yet. And one note here, as we kind of transition to looking at the spec tree, Archon still gets access to Mind Flay and Sanity when you press Halo. This is important because the base spec tree got this removed. So we have Surge of Insanity still, but it's not giving Mind Flay and Sanity. It's just a passive buff to Flay. So if you like the Mind Flay and Sanity kind of gameplay loop, that's basically gone. You're only getting, what is it, like 3 per cast of Halo now. If you're playing Archon, it's the only way you ever see Mind Flay and Sanity in the kit as it stands right now. Otherwise, there's really not much to talk about when it comes to the hero talents. I'm guessing we'll have, I'll do like future content on that as we see more changes. So let's kind of move on to the spec tree. That's where most of the big stuff there is to talk about. All right, so clearly the spec tree looks kind of crazy. There's a lot to go over. I'm just going to kind of start from the top here. So first off, Devouring Plague, like I mentioned, was renamed to Shadow Word Madness, and the healing component was removed. Not a big fan of this name, to be honest. They also left the icon, which feels weird. So, but I'm guessing they did this partially because, like, there's now a Devour Demon Hunter spec, so Devouring Plague was weird, and they wanted to cut back on our self-healing, which, you know, they've definitely done. And they've also done a rename for Shadow Crash and a little bit of a rework here. So now we have a Tentacle Slam, and this thing looks amazing. Just straight up, I'll show it right here. Massive tentacle. It's just, what else could you ask for? Look how, it's just so cool. And it's massive. So this is very interesting. They've kind of taken a lot of the feedback with Shadow Crash, and I think they were like, hey, we've been trying to fix the bugs that the spell has, and they just couldn't quite get it right. So I think they're like, let's just build a new spell, and it looks awesome. Cool new icon, all that good stuff. Functionally speaking, it does a lot of the same things that Shadow Crash did. So we're still getting 2 charges, 15-second cooldown. It is only still dotting 6 targets, so that part is the same. It's still an 8-yard radius around your target when you hit it. However, there is only a targeted version, so there's no more reticle where you can pre-place it somewhere. So that is gone. It's only, you have to select a specific target to cast it on. But to compensate a little bit, they changed it up a little bit to where now it will dot things in a line between yourself and the target. It hits those things in a line between yourself and the target, which is kind of interesting. It's giving you a bit more flexibility to a spell that you otherwise wouldn't have because it is just a specific target that you're setting it at. So what that actually means is, if I can try to position myself for this, so if I'm targeting this dummy over here, or maybe this guy right here is probably a better example. In between me are all of these training dummies here, but I'm targeting this one. So what happens is the tentacle is going to hit all of the guys in front of me and dot them and do an 8-yard radius around my target. So if we show that the other way around, so if I go on this side of the field, same kind of thing. So, oh, don't hit me. So I'm targeting the cleave training dummy over here. I tentacle slam, it's going to hit this training dummy and then also cleave around my target. So you get a little bit of more flexibility there than you would with just a simple targeted version. I do wish the radius around your target was a little bit bigger now that we can't pre-place it. But that part is nice. It is also considerably faster than Shadow Crash. So Shadow Crash, as you might remember, had a little bit of a travel time, right? Where you cast it, second and a half later, it would hit your target. Tentacle Slam is faster. From when you press the ability to when the target gets dotted is about half a second. So that part is nice if you're trying to like quickly make sure you get your targets dotted. And if you're talking about like pre-placing stuff, you know, that part is a little bit nicer just because it's just a faster reaction. You don't have to, you know, pre-plan as much. The one thing that I'll say right now is when you press Tentacle Slam, you're instantly in combat with that target. So we can't precast this as the pull is ramping up because it puts you in combat. That part is a little unfortunate because everything's happening a half second later, so I wish it didn't start combat until a half second later. I'm assuming that's a bug that they can fix. If they do, we'll still be able to like precast it right before pull starts, which is really nice. So yeah, Tentacle Slam looks awesome. You got 2 charges. It's a little flexible. And it really seems like they're kind of building a lot around this spell. And we'll get to that when we get to the new talents here in a second, but wanted to cover that. I'm probably going to do its own separate video on Tentacle Slam as well with a bit more details, so check that out when I post it. Okay, what else we got? So we talked about Void Eruption to Void Form already, and all that changes. Surge of Insanity, not there anymore. Okay, Shadowy Apparitions. Let's go there next. So they've done a little bit of weird stuff with Shadowy Apparitions, where now less spells proc this. So they got rid of Void Bolt, so that's not here proccing this anymore. And they've also removed Mind Blast from proccing Apparitions. So the only way that you can actually generate these is with Shadow Word Madness, which is the new Devouring Plague, or Tormented Spirits, which that still works the same way, or the new Apex Talents, which we'll cover that in a second. So that does kind of neuter Mind Blast a little bit. It's kind of pulling functionality of that out of that spell, which is a little weird. Not quite sure why they did that. And yeah, cutting back a little bit on Apparition Generation baseline, and part of that's to pull us into the Apex Talents, which we'll cover in a second, but that was just baseline changed for Shadowy Apparitions. Let's see. I already talked about Void Volley a little bit. Okay, let's talk about Shadow Word Death and kind of Death Speaker stuff. So while Shadow Word Death is still in the class tree, they moved Death and Madness out of it, and now it's a choice between that or Death Speaker. This is pretty not cool, in my opinion. Shadow Word Death was already pretty weak baseline, and now there's just, you can't take these two together anymore. So it just feels even weaker. So honestly, Shadow Word Death in and of itself could use some love, or honestly maybe throw Death and Madness back in here so it's not competing with all this other stuff and Death Speaker. Yeah, not a big fan of that change, but we have time to fix that. They've also made Maddening Touch a 1-point talent, and Insidious Ire now affects Mind Flay. So removed a lot of stuff from Mind Blast, added more modifiers to Flay is what that looks like. There's the Tentacle Slam animation. Oh yeah, good point too. So with Devouring Plague, just to cover that, animation has also been changed. So if we're on this target here, we no longer have that like little face that was popping up. I'll turn off that so you can just see. So it's just like red animation, kind of like that N'Zoth eye, with Shadow Word Madness now. So no more purple or plaguey. So yeah, it's something. It's, you know, it's not a casted spell, so there's not a whole lot you can do around the character, but that is what we have so far. Okay, let's talk about kind of the tree in general. A lot of this has been stayed the same, except for the stuff where they injected Shadow Fiend, Death Madness, that kind of stuff. They've renamed a couple things. Bottom of the tree is almost completely intact. But new with Midnight, we now get Apex Talents. So that's what you see down here. And our Apex Talent as a Shadow Priest is Void Apparitions. So they're really leaning heavily into that theme here. And a lot of Old God Idol stuff, which I love. So Void Apparitions, this first point, is when an effect from an idol is activated, you spawn an apparition. So they removed apparitions from Blast, removed Void Bolt, but now anytime you get a Yasharaj proc or a N'Zoth proc at 50 or 100 stacks, you spawn a Yogg Saron, or you spawn a Idol of Cthulhu Tendril, you will also trigger apparitions. Okay, so they're kind of adding that back into the kit through that. The second bit here, and these are all in a line, so you have to take them. Oops, I'm stuck in combat, but you have to take left to right. You can't only get some of these. They're in a line here. So the second one is also called Void Apparitions, and this is a 2-pointer. It says Shadowy Apparitions have a 30% chance to spawn as a Void Apparition that cast a Void Bolt at their target and deal more damage. Weirdly with this, I don't know if this was intended, but this Void Bolt, even though it's called Void Bolt, looks the same, is not refreshing dots, which is weird. Like, that was kind of the big point of Void Bolt. So, yeah, that's weird. Now, the cool part about this is they did give them their own little animation here. So, I'll Tentacle Slam here. And the apparitions themselves, when they become Void Apparitions, have these tentacles around them, just like you would inside of Void form. So, I'll show it again, see if we get some. So yeah, so the ones that have tentacles, those are your void apparitions that deal more damage. But yeah, kind of weird. The void bolt isn't refreshing. I don't know. It's a strange decision, but that's what this guy is. And the last one is Tentacle Slam has a guaranteed chance to activate an effect from one of your idols. So this is really cool for a couple of different reasons. The first one is this will cast even if you don't have the idol talented. So if you don't have any idols talented at all, you can still proc them. What this means is you can randomly get a Yashiraj proc. You can get either the 50 or 100 stack N'Zoth proc. You can just get a Yogg to spawn, or you can get a Tendril to spawn. So this is kind of making Tentacle Slam like a rotational ability. You see I just got a Yogg Saron for free there. Kind of mixes up the gameplay a little bit, kind of fun and interesting in that way. And really just, I don't know, kind of integrating that, which I think is kind of a good thing because we've lost Void Bolt, we lost Void Torrent, and so having another spell to kind of weave into our rotation is kind of nice. It does mean on single target, you're going to want to make sure you're using these charges on cooldown, which, you know, Void Weaver was already doing to sustain its dots anyways, but this does mean it is something we're always going to be pressing for those procs. It doesn't mean you always have to slam every charge on cooldown, and you won't have it for ads. You just have to make sure you're not capping charges. That's the big thing to note. So not the end of the world, but it is something to note if you care about that. And yeah, let's see. What did we get there? We got an N'Zoth proc there. That one's not very noticeable because there's no buff to track there. It's still hidden for some reason. But we got an N'Zoth proc there. So I don't know. It's kind of interesting. Let's see. That one I think was another N'Zoth proc. But gets a little bit of like, I don't know, a little bit of an interesting mix with the rotation. You see we got a Void Lasher there. So yeah, it's kind of a neat little effect. And I think it's going to be a case of like, we're always going to want to play that because it just makes those spells better. And it gives a little bit more oomph to those spells than we might have otherwise. And really just kind of like connects everything more together than we had before. The idols were kind of off on their own and they weren't really baked into the kit too much. But now they have that apparition synergy with the rest of the kit, which I think makes it feel really nice. I'm a big fan of that. So, and that is kind of in a nutshell all the stuff that's changed with Shadow Priest going into Midnight, at least so far. Like I mentioned, we still have a couple of things coming soon. Void Weaver's broken. The hero talents are still under construction. So I'll be doing more videos as things change. But for now, that is what we have to talk about for Shadow Priest. I've already started giving out feedback posts on the forums. I will keep doing that. And again, stuff is linked down below. There's a lot more to cover with Midnight, especially all the UI changes. I will just note, I'm not going to cover it in this video, but everything you saw here on the screen is base UI in the new expansion. No add-ons were made in this video or used in this video. So let me know what kind of content you want to see from Alpha coming up on this channel. I will be streaming on Twitch as well when I get time. And that's all we have for today's video. Thank you for watching. Catch you later.